Chapter 1. The mark of ruined birthmark had always been there. A dark constellation sprawled across Elena's left shoulder blade like spilled ink. Her mother had called it a shadow. The village healer had called it a curse. The man who'd promised to marry her had called it revolting the night he left her at the altar. His family's whispered horror echoing through the stone church. That was 3 months ago. Now Elena lived in the margins of Grey Hollow, a city where fog never lifted and gaslight struggled against perpetual dusk. She rented a room above a printer's shop, took in mending for pennies, and kept her hair long enough to hide the mark when her dresses slipped. Tonight, she walked home through the old quarter because the route was shorter and she was tired of being afraid. The streets here were older than memory, cobblestones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Buildings leaned together like conspirators, their windows dark or boarded shut. The few gas lamps that still functioned cast pools of sickly yellow light that seemed to make the shadows deeper. Elena clutched her shawl tighter, her basket of mending pressed against her ribs. The printer had paid her late, and she'd stayed to finish a torn hem that couldn't wait. Now the bells of St. Maro's were chiming 10, and the streets had emptied as if by some unspoken curfew. She heard the footsteps before she saw them. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. Elena quickened her pace, heart hammering. The footsteps matched her rhythm. She turned down a narrower alley, hoping to lose them in the maze of passages that led toward the market district. The walls closed in, slick with moisture that might have been rain or might have been something else. A figure stepped into her path. He was tall, dressed in dark wool that suggested money but not ostentation. His face was angular, pale even in the dim light, with eyes that caught the distant lamplight and reflected it back like a cat's. He smiled. And Elena saw his teeth. She stumbled backward, dropping her basket. Spools of thread rolled across the wet stones. Running? His voice was cultured, amused. How delightfully traditional. 2 more figures emerged from doorways she'd thought were sealed. A woman in a crimson dress that looked like it belonged in a portrait from the centuries ago. A younger man with golden hair and a face too beautiful to be entirely human. Elena's back hit the wall. I don't have anything worth taking. No? The first man stepped closer. He moved wrong, too fluid, as if gravity held him differently than it held her. I wonder about that. The woman circled left, head tilted like a bird examining a worm. She's nothing, Christoph. Mortal. Mundane. Let's find richer prey. Look at her shoulder, Christoph said softly. Elena's blood turned to ice. Her shawl had slipped. She grabbed for it, but the golden-haired man was suddenly there, impossibly fast, catching her wrist with fingers cold as marble. No, Christoph breathed. No, that's not possible. He was staring at her birthmark, at the pattern of dark pigment that looked almost like writing in a language no one could read. His face had gone slack with something between wonder and terror. That's the Aldrich seal, the woman whispered. But she's human. She can't let her go. The voice came from above. Elena looked up and saw him crouched on the wall's edge, 3 stories high, coat billowing in wind that didn't touch the alley floor. He dropped, landing with barely a sound, and rose to his full height between Elena and her attackers. He was taller than Christoph, broader in the shoulders, wearing black that seemed to drink the darkness. His hair was dark as well, long enough to brush his collar, and his face was all hard planes and sharp edges. But his eyes were worse. They were black, utterly black, without iris or pupil to give them dimension. And they were fixed on Christoph with the intensity of a predator who'd found a trespasser in his territory. Lord Aldrich, Christoph said, and his cultured voice had gone thin. We didn't know she was claimed. She's not claimed. The words were cold, final. But she's under my protection as of this moment. Touch her again, and I'll present your ashes to House Morwen as a formal declaration of war. The woman in crimson paled. Even in her terror, Elena registered that a dead woman going whiter still. We meant no offense to your house. Then leave. Now. They left. One moment they were there, the next they were simply gone, vanished into shadow, as if they'd never been real at all. Elena sagged against the wall, her legs suddenly unable to hold her. The man who'd saved her, Lord Aldrich, they'd called him, turned to face her. Those impossible eyes swept over her, and she felt examined, assessed, catalogued in a way that made her skin crawl. Who are you? She managed. Someone who just made a very dangerous promise. He stepped closer, and she saw his face properly in the thin light. Beautiful, inhuman, ancient. Show me your shoulder. No, his eyebrow lifted. I just saved your life. And now you want payment? Bitterness flooded her tongue. I've had enough of men who think they own me because I don't want to own you. His voice was still cold, but something had shifted in it. I want to understand why you're marked with my family seal when there hasn't been a living heir in 300 years. Elena's hand went to her shoulder, covering the birthmark through her dress. I don't know what you're talking about. I've had this mark since birth. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he went to one knee on the filthy cobblestones. His head bowed. My lady, he said, and his voice shook. Forgive me. I should have recognized you sooner. Elena's vision swam. I'm not a lady. I'm a seamstress. You've made a mistake. He looked up at her, those black eyes burning. No mistake. That mark proves you're blood-bound to House Aldrich, which means, whether you know it or not, you're the last person alive who can save us all from extinction. The fog rolled in thicker, and somewhere in the distance, a bell began to toll midnight. Chapter 2. The threshold. Elena didn't remember deciding to follow him. One moment she was pressed against the alley wall, her world reduced to the impossible sight of a man kneeling before her in the filth. The next, he was standing with inhuman grace, offering his hand, and she was taking it. His fingers were cold. Not the chill of winter air, but the deep, settled cold of stone that had never known sunlight. We can't stay here, he said. House Morwen will return with reinforcements. They'll want to know why I've claimed you. You said I wasn't claimed. I lied. He released her hand and retrieved her fallen basket, gathering scattered spools with efficiency that suggested he'd done menial tasks before, however long ago. I had to. The truth would have started a war tonight, and I need time to understand what you are. What you are, not who. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how thin her shawl was, how the fog seemed to carry voices that whispered in languages older than English. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. He handed her the basket. Somewhere they won't dare follow, even if they suspect. He led her deeper into the old quarter, through passages that seemed to shift and reconfigure when she wasn't looking directly at them. The buildings here were truly ancient, their foundations predating the modern city by centuries. Some still bore marks from the Great Fire of 1666. Charred timbers preserved under newer construction like bones under skin. They stopped before a townhouse that looked abandoned. Its windows shuttered, its door sealed with boards that had rotted through in places. Lord Aldrich pressed his palm against the wood, and Elena heard locks clicking open. Mechanisms moving that shouldn't have existed behind a door that appeared unused for decades. The door swung inward on silent hinges. After you, he said. Elena hesitated on the threshold. Every instinct screamed at her to run. She'd just watched 3 people vanish into shadow. She'd seen a man drop 3 stories without injury. She'd felt the unnatural cold of his hand, and seen eyes that reflected light like an animal's. But where would she run? Back to her rented room. Where? House Morwen, whatever that meant, could find her. Back to a village that had called her cursed. To a man who'd abandoned her at the altar. She stepped inside. The interior was nothing like the exterior suggested. Candlelight bloomed as she entered, flames igniting in wall sconces without anyone touching them. The entrance hall was paneled in dark wood, polished to a mirror shine, furnished with pieces that belonged in museums. A chandelier hung overhead, its crystals catching the light and scattering it in rainbow fragments across the floor. Lord Aldrich closed the door behind them. The sound of the locks engaging was louder from inside, more final. You live here? Elena asked. Her voice echoed in the high-ceilinged space. I maintain several residences throughout the city. This one is the most secure. He moved past her, shrugging out of his coat with the casual grace of someone utterly comfortable in his own skin. Beneath it, he wore a waistcoat and shirt that would have been fashionable 50 years ago, the collar high and severe. The wards I've placed on this house have held for 2 centuries. Nothing enters without my permission. Elena set her basket down on a side table that probably cost more than everything she owned. Wards? You mean magic. I mean blood contracts, binding oaths, and a reputation that makes even the boldest of my kind think twice. He turned to face her fully, and in the warm candlelight his features were almost human. Almost, but yes. If you prefer simpler terms, magic, you're kind, Elena repeated. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them together. You're going to tell me you're a vampire. Would you believe me if I did? I don't know what I believe anymore. She looked at him properly now, cataloging details she'd missed in the chaos of the alley. The way his chest didn't rise and fall with breath, the absolute stillness of his posture, as if he could stand motionless for hours without discomfort, the pallor of his skin, which wasn't the pallor of illness, but of something that had simply stopped being alive. But I saw what those others did, how they moved, and I saw you. He inclined his head. Then let me be clear. I am Adrian Aldrich, Lord of House Aldrich, born in the year of our Lord 1689. I have not been human for 337 years. I do not breathe, my heart does not beat, and I sustain myself on blood drawn from those who consent to give it. By every definition your world has for the word, I am a vampire. The room tilted. Elena grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. You're going to faint, Adrian observed. It wasn't a question. I'm not, but her vision was narrowing. Darkness creeping in at the edges. He was there suddenly, guiding her into the chair, pressing her head down between her knees with a hand that was gentle despite its coldness. Breathe, slowly. You're in shock, but you're safe here. Safe, Elena gasped. With a vampire. With a vampire who needs you alive and healthy to understand what that mark means. His hand remained on the back of her neck, steadying. I won't harm you, Elena. I give you my word, which in my world is binding. No blood will be taken without your explicit consent, and you may leave whenever you wish. She managed to lift her head, meeting his eyes. They were still black, still inhuman, but there was something in them now that looked like concern. Why did you kneel? Adrian's jaw tightened. He withdrew his hand and stood, putting distance between them. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. Because that mark on your shoulder is the sigil of my bloodline. It appears only on those born under a blood oath, bound to House Aldrich by ties that transcend mortality. But the last person to bear it died 3 centuries ago, in the same fire that destroyed most of my family. I don't understand, neither do I. He turned away, staring at a portrait on the wall, a young woman in Restoration-era dress, her dark hair elaborately curled, her eyes painted with devastating accuracy. But that mark means you're either my salvation or my doom. And until I determine which, you're staying here. Elena looked at the locked door, at the vampire who'd claimed her, at the impossible situation she'd stumbled into. I don't suppose, she said quietly, I have much choice in the matter. Adrian glanced back at her. For just a moment, something that might have been regret flickered across his ancient face. No, he admitted, I don't suppose you do. Chapter 3. The Watcher in the Dark. Hadrian gave her a bedroom on the 2nd floor, far from his own quarters. The room was beautiful in the way museums were beautiful, pristine, untouched, slightly suffocating. The bed was a 4-poster draped in heavy velvet. The wardrobe held dresses that would have fit her perfectly if she'd lived a century ago. And the window looked out over a garden that shouldn't have existed in the middle of London's old quarter. Elena stood at that window now, watching fog curl through hedges shaped like creatures from mythology. The moon was hidden behind clouds, but she could see clearly anyway, as if the garden generated its own pale light. She'd been here 3 days, 3 days of waking to find breakfast laid out on a tray outside her door, fresh bread, eggs, tea that steamed as if it had just been poured. 3 days of wandering the house's endless corridors while Adrian remained absent during daylight hours, locked away in whatever chamber vampires used for their death-like sleep. 3 days of dinner, eaten in the formal dining room while he sat across from her, not eating, watching her with those black eyes that never seemed to blink. He'd been unfailingly polite. He'd offered her books from his library, music from a gramophone that played recordings she'd never heard. He'd answered her questions about vampire nature with clinical precision. Yes, sunlight was fatal. No, holy water was merely water. Yes, they could be killed, but it required specific methods he declined to detail. What he hadn't done was explain the mark. Elena pressed her palm against the cold glass. She'd examined her birthmark in the mirror, trying to see what Adrian saw. It still looked like random pigmentation to her, dark sprawls across her shoulder blade with no discernible pattern. But when she traced it with her fingers, she felt something, a warmth, a pulse, as if the mark had its own heartbeat. You should be sleeping. She spun around. Adrian stood in the doorway, materializing from shadows as if he'd been part of them. He'd changed from his formal attire into something simpler, dark trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. It was the most casual she'd seen him, and it made him look almost approachable. Almost. I can't sleep, Elena said. I keep thinking about those people in the alley. House Morwen. You said they'd come back, They will. But not here. Not yet. He entered the room without invitation, moving to the window beside her. They're waiting to see what I do next. Whether I present you to the Night Court or keep you hidden. What's the Night Court? The governing body of vampire society in Britain. 7 houses, each represented by their eldest member. We convene monthly to settle disputes, negotiate treaties, and maintain the laws that keep us hidden from your world. His gaze remained fixed on the garden. I've missed the last 2 sessions. They'll be wondering why. Elena studied his profile. In the dim light, she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the slight tension in his jaw. Markers of expression, preserved from whatever age he'd been when he died and become something else. How old were you when you were turned? 28. Young by the standards of my time, when most men weren't considered fully adult until 30, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. I thought myself very mature, very ready to accept the dark gift my sire offered. Do you regret it? The smile vanished. Every day for the first century. After that, regret becomes a dull ache rather than a sharp pain. You learn to live with it the way mortals learn to live with old injuries. She wanted to ask more, to understand what could drive someone to choose immortality, but his expression had closed. He looked like the stranger from the alley again, remote and dangerous. Why won't you tell me about the mark? She asked instead. Adrian was silent for a long moment. Then he reached out, and before she could pull away, his fingers brushed the nape of her neck. The touch was feather-light cold, but it sent electricity racing down her spine. May I? He asked quietly. Elena's throat had gone dry. She nodded. He lifted her hair, exposing the mark. She felt him tracing it, following patterns she couldn't see, and his fingers trembled. Actually trembled. This ancient creature who'd claimed nothing could shake him. It's the Aldrich seal, he said finally. The mark we branded on those under our protection in the old days, before the laws changed. But it's more than that. There are words woven into the design. A contract written in the old tongue. What does it say? Blood of my blood, bound until death breaks faith, or love redeems what was lost. His hand fell away. It's a marriage mark, Elena. The kind exchanged between vampire and mortal when one of my kind took a human spouse. Rare. Even then. Forbidden now. Elena turned to face him, her back against the window. But I've never met a vampire before you. I've never made any contract. No? But someone did. Someone in your bloodline. And the contract wasn't fulfilled. Adrian's eyes met hers, and she saw genuine uncertainty there. Either the vampire died before the bond could be completed, or the mortal betrayed the oath. Either way, the mark passes down through generations until it finds someone who can fulfill or break it. That's insane. I don't even know my family history past my grandmother. Then we need to discover it. He moved away, pacing the room with restless energy. Because House Morwen knows what that mark means. They know that if you complete the bond with me, House Aldrich gains power we haven't had in 3 centuries. And they'll do anything to prevent that. Complete the bond, Elena repeated. You mean marry you? In the old sense. Blood exchange, oath binding. A connection that would tie your life to mine until you chose to sever it or accepted the gift of immortality. He stopped pacing, fixing her with an intense stare. I'm not proposing, Elena. I'm explaining the danger. You're in. Because other vampires think I belong to you. Because other vampires think you could shift the balance of power in the night. Court. Adrian's expression darkened. House Aldrich has been weak since my family died. We hold our seat by reputation and ancient right, but we have no heirs, no allies willing to bind themselves to a dying house. You could change that. Elena's mind raced. Or you could just let me go. Tell them I'm nobody. That the mark is a coincidence. They wouldn't believe it. And even if they did, he cut himself off, jaw clenched. What? I've already claimed you, he said quietly, in front of witnesses. If I release you now, it would be seen as weakness. House Morwen would take you anyway, torture you for information, kill you to spite me. At least here, you're protected, prisoner. The words were starting to sound the same. So what do we do? Elena asked. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like respect in those inhuman eyes. We survive, he said. Together. Until I can find a way to keep you safe that doesn't require you sacrificing your humanity. Outside, the church bells began to toll 3 in the morning. In the garden, something howled. Chapter 4. Small merciless howling came again, closer this time. Elena stepped back from the window, but Adrian moved forward, his posture shifting into something predatory. Stay here, he commanded, already moving toward the door. What is that? Nothing that will reach you. He paused at the threshold, glancing back. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Then he was gone, moving with that impossible speed that made him blur at the edges. Elena stood frozen for a heartbeat before her survival instincts kicked in. She ran to the door, turned the heavy iron key, and pressed her ear against the wood. Silence. Then, distantly, the sound of something shattering, a roar that didn't sound remotely human. And beneath it all, Adrian's voice, speaking words in a language that made her teeth ache. The sounds faded. Minutes crawled past, measured by her racing heartbeat. When the knock finally came, gentle and deliberate, Elena nearly screamed. It's me, Adrian said through the door. You can open it now. She fumbled with the lock. He stood in the hallway, his white shirt torn at the shoulder, a dark stain spreading across the fabric. Not blood, something thicker, almost black in the candlelight. You're hurt, Elena said. I'm fine. But he swayed slightly. Catching himself against the doorframe, Elena made a decision she'd probably regret. She grabbed his uninjured arm and pulled him into the room, shutting the door behind them. Sit. On the bed. Elena, sit. He obeyed, perhaps too surprised to argue. Elena lit the oil lamp on the bedside table, flooding the room with warm light. The stain on his shirt was definitely not blood, it was darker, viscous, with an oily sheen that reminded her of ink. What is this? She reached for his shirt, then hesitated. May I? Adrian's expression flickered with something she couldn't read. Yes. Her fingers trembled as she helped him shrug out of the ruined shirt. His skin was marble pale, smooth, but beneath the strange substance she could see a wounded deep gash across his shoulder that looked like it had been made by claws. As she watched, the edges of the wound were already knitting together, flesh, mending itself with visible slowness. Vampire blood, Adrian said, his voice tight. Not mine. It burns when it touches us, a safeguard to prevent us from feeding on each other. It'll pass. Elena had no cloth, no bandages. She looked around desperately, then grabbed the hem of her nightgown and tore a strip from it. Adrian caught her wrist. You don't need to be quiet and let me help. She pulled free and began wiping the viscous substance away from his wound. His skin was cold under her fingers, unnaturally so, but solid, real. What attacked you? A scout from House Morwen. A young one, stupid enough to test my wards. Adrian watched her work, his black eyes unreadable. I sent him back with a message. They won't try that approach again. Is he dead? No, badly injured, humiliated, but alive. Killing him would have been a declaration of war. His jaw tightened as she cleaned the worst of the wound. This will heal by morning. You're wasting your effort. Maybe I'm not doing it for you, Elena said quietly. Maybe I'm doing it because I need to do something other than be afraid. Adrian fell silent at that. She worked carefully, wiping away the last of the toxic blood. The wound was already half closed, the edges sealed together in a way that should have been impossible. When she was finished, she sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how close they were. How intimate this was, her in her nightgown, him shirtless, both of them on her bed in the small hours of morning. Thank you, Adrian said. The words sounded rusty, as if he didn't say them often. You're protecting me. It seemed only fair. Elena stood, putting distance between them. Will they send more? Probably, but not for a while. I've reminded them why House Aldrich was feared once. He rose as well, moving to retrieve his torn shirt from the floor. You should try to sleep. Tomorrow night, I need to take you to my study. There are records there, genealogies that might help us trace your bloodline. Can't we do it now? Now you're exhausted, in shock, and running on fear. His voice was gentle. Rest, Elena. I won't let anything harm you. She wanted to argue, but a yawn caught her by surprise. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind bone-deep weariness. Will you be all right? That wound will be gone by sunset. Adrian moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, most humans faint at the sight of vampire blood. Or run. You did neither. Should I have? Probably. A hint of something that might have been admiration touched his features. Lock the door after me. Try to sleep. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Elena turned the key, then leaned against the wood, her heart still racing. She'd just tended a vampire's wounds. She'd touched his skin, seen his blood or whatever that dark substance had been. She should be horrified, disgusted, terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm. As if some part of her had accepted this new reality and was already adapting to it, Elena climbed into bed, pulling the heavy covers up to her chin. The lamp still burned, casting dancing shadows on the ceiling. She stared at them, trying to make sense of the past few days. The mark on her shoulder, the contract written in her skin, the vampire who knelt before her, who defended her, who looked at her sometimes like she was a puzzle he desperately needed to solve. Blood of my blood. Bound until death breaks faith or love redeems what was lost. What had been lost? Who had made the original contract? And why did her birthmark burn warm when she thought about Adrian's cold fingers tracing its pattern? Sleep came eventually, heavy and dreamless. But as Elena drifted off, she could have sworn she felt a presence in the hallway outside her door, standing guard, watching over her, keeping her safe, or keeping her prisoner. Perhaps both. When she woke hours later to afternoon sunlight streaming through the window, there was a fresh dress laid across the chair, deep blue silk that would fit her perfectly, and a note in elegant script. The study. Tonight, we begin searching for answers. Elena held the note, studying the strong, precise handwriting. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into the drawer of the bedside table, next to the strip of torn nightgown still stained with dark, oily blood, evidence that last night had been real. That all of this was real, and that somewhere in this house, a vampire slept, healing from wounds he'd taken to protect her. Chapter 5. Blood and Ink. The study was a cathedral of books. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, packed with leather-bound volumes whose spines bore titles in Latin, French, languages Elena didn't recognize. The 4th wall was dominated by a massive fireplace where flames crackled despite no visible wood, casting the room an amber light that danced across Persian rugs and furniture that had witnessed centuries pass. Adrian stood at a table in the center, surrounded by open books and loose papers covered in spidery handwriting. He'd changed into formal evening wear, black suit, high collar, every inch the Victorian gentleman, except for the eyes that tracked her entrance with inhuman precision. The dress fits, he observed. Elena smoothed the blue silk self-consciously. It did fit, perfectly, as if it had been made for her. The neckline was lower than she was used to, exposing her collarbones, the curve of her throat. She'd braided her hair to keep it off her neck, but wisps had already escaped. Where did it come from? The wardrobe in your room belonged to my sister. Adrian's voice was carefully neutral. She died in 1689, the same year I was turned. Elena's hand went to the silk. I shouldn't wear, she would want someone to. Rebecca hated waste. He gestured to a chair across from him. Sit. I've been reviewing the family records. She settled into the chair, acutely aware of how the firelight played across his features. In the warm glow, he looked almost alive, almost human. But then he'd turn his head a certain way and the illusion would shatter, the absolute stillness, the predatory grace, the sense of something vast and cold watching from behind those black eyes. I've traced every branch of House Aldrich, Adrian continued, pushing a genealogical chart toward her. Every marriage, every oath, every blood bond formed in the 3 centuries before the fire. None of them match your name or your family. Elena studied the chart. Names branched and split, interconnected by lines labeled with dates and locations. Some lines ended abruptly with notations like deceased 1666 or blood oath broken, 1702. Others simply trailed off into nothing, unfinished. What about after the fire? There was no after. House Aldrich effectively died that night. I survived only because I was hunting in the countryside. His fingers traced one of the lines, stopping at a name, Marian Aldrich, B. 1667. My niece. She would have been 22. Old enough to have formed a blood bond, if she'd chosen to. But you don't know if she did? The fire destroyed most of our records. What I have here are copies, documents stored in other locations, fragments pieced together over decades. Adrian looked up at her, and there was old pain in his eyes. I've spent 3 centuries trying to understand what happened that night. Why? The fire started. Who set it? Whether it was accident or murder. Elena leaned forward. You think someone killed your family? I think House Morwen has always coveted our territories, our influence. And I think they celebrated very loudly when House Aldrich fell. His jaw tightened. But I've never had proof. Just suspicion. And the knowledge that vampire houses don't burn by accident. We're too careful with fire, too aware of its danger. the flames in the fireplace popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Elena watched them dance and die. If Marianne did form a blood bond, and she died before completing it, the mark would pass to her descendants. Yes, Adrian pulled another document forward, this one covered in dense text. Blood bonds are notoriously difficult to break. They require either mutual consent or the death of both parties. If Marianne died with the bond incomplete, it would seek the next compatible bloodline. Compatible? How? That's the question. He stood, pacing to the fireplace. The flames reflected in his eyes, turning them from black to something that burned. Blood bonds form based on resonance, some quality in the mortal that calls to something in the vampire. It's not about genetics alone. It's about compatibility of spirit, I suppose you'd say. Elena touched her shoulder where the mark lay hidden beneath silk. So if I carry Marianne's bond, I must be like her somehow, perhaps. Or perhaps the bond has evolved, seeking someone who can fulfill what she could not. Adrian turned back to her. Elena, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Have you ever felt drawn to the night? To darkness? Have you ever had dreams of places you've never been? People you've never met? She wanted to say no, but memories surfaced unbidden. Childhood dreams of a grand house burning, a woman with dark hair screaming, the sensation of being pulled down into darkness that felt almost like safety. Sometimes, she admitted, when I was young, I thought everyone had dreams like that. Adrian's expression shifted. Describe them. A house, stone, ivy covered, beautiful. Then fire everywhere, smoke so thick I couldn't breathe. Elena's hands trembled in her lap. And a woman. She'd look at me and say, find him, over and over. I thought she meant my father. He died when I was 6. But she didn't look like my mother. She looked like, she gestured at the portrait above the fireplace, a young woman in 17th century dress. Like her, Rebecca. Adrian's voice had gone hoarse. My sister. She died trying to get everyone out of the house. I'm sorry. Don't be. You've given me more information than I've uncovered in 300 years. He returned to the table, rifling through papers with renewed purpose. If you're dreaming of Rebecca, if you're seeing the fire through her eyes, then the connection runs deeper than a simple blood bond. You're not just marked, Elena. You're carrying memory. That's impossible. So are vampires. He pulled out a leather journal, blowing dust from its cover. Blood memory. It's rare, theoretical, mostly dismissed as myth. But the old texts speak of it, the ability of a blood bond to pass not just power but experience, knowledge, even pieces of soul. Elena's chest tightened. You're saying I have pieces of your niece's soul? I'm saying you might be the key to understanding what really happened the night my family died. Adrian set the journal before her. The cover was embossed with the same symbol that marked her shoulder. And that house. Morwen knows it. They didn't attack tonight by accident, Elena. They're afraid of what you might remember. She stared at the journal, afraid to touch it. What if I remember something terrible? Then at least we'll know the truth. Adrian's hand covered hers, cold and steady. I won't force you. But if you're willing to try. This journal was Marianne's. If the blood bond connects you to her, touching it might trigger more memories. Elena looked at their hands, his pale and motionless, hers warm and trembling. She thought of the woman in her dreams, screaming, find him, as flames consumed everything. She thought of the mark on her shoulder that pulsed warm whenever Adrian was near. She thought of spending the rest of her life wondering. Show me, she whispered. Adrian opened the journal. The pages were covered in a woman's handwriting, elegant but hurried. He turned to a passage near the end, where the writing grew wild, desperate. Elena touched the page. The world exploded into fire and memory. Chapter 6. The weight of ghosts was running through smoke-filled corridors, her skirts heavy with ash. Flames licked at the tapestries, consuming 300 years of history in minutes. The heat was unbearable, but she couldn't stop. Wouldn't stop. Marianne. A voice behind her, her mother, Lady Aldrich, coughing through the smoke. Leave it. We must get out. I can't. Her own voice, younger, desperate. The contract is in the vault. If they find it, your life matters more than paper. But it wasn't just paper. It was everything. The bond she'd sworn. The man she'd promised to meet again. If House Morwen found the contract, they'd know. They'd use it against Uncle Adrian. Against all of them. The vault door was already hot to the touch. She pulled her sleeve over her hand, worked the combination her uncle had taught her. Inside, documents and gold, and there, the contract, sealed with blood and wax. She grabbed it, shoved it into her bodice. Behind her, something collapsed with a roar that shook the floor. She turned to run back, but the hallway was an inferno. The ceiling groaned, timbers cracking. Through the smoke, she saw her mother's face, beautiful even in terror. "I love you," Lady Aldrich mouthed. Then the ceiling came down between them. Marianne screamed. Elena jerked back, gasping. The study solidified around her, the fireplace, the books, Adrian's hands gripping her shoulders to keep her from falling out of the chair. "Breathe," he commanded. "Elena, breathe." She dragged air into her lungs, tasting phantom smoke. Her cheeks were wet. When had she started crying? "I saw her," Elena choked out. "Marianne." She was trying to save something. A contract. Her hand went to her chest, mirroring the gesture from the vision. She hid it in her dress before the ceiling fell. Adrian's face had gone impossibly pallor. "A contract? What kind?" "I don't know. She was so afraid. She said if House Morwen found it, they'd use it against you." Elena looked up at him, seeing the grief raw in his eyes. "Your sister tried to get everyone out. I saw her." She told Marianne she loved her. Adrian released her shoulders and turned away, but not before she saw his expression crumble. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. She didn't think vampires could feel. Rebecca always put everyone else first. Even at the end, "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." No, he held up a hand, still not facing her. "You gave me something I've needed for 3 centuries. Confirmation that they didn't suffer long. That Rebecca." He stopped, shoulders rigid. "Thank you." They sat in silence, the fire crackling. Elena's hands were still shaking. The memory felt so real, so visceral, as if she'd actually been there, actually felt the heat, the terror, the desperate need to protect something precious. "What happened to Marianne?" she asked quietly. "After the ceiling fell, we never found her body. I assumed it was consumed completely in the fire." Adrian turned back, his composure restored, but his eyes still haunted. If she survived even minutes after that, if she managed to hide the contract somewhere, it could still exist, after 300 years. Unlikely, but he stopped, a thought clearly occurring to him. "Your dreams. The woman who tells you to find him. Rebecca died instantly, I'm certain of it. But Marianne, if she lived long enough to pass on the blood bond, she might have impressed that final thought onto it. A message." Elena's mind raced. Find who? The man she made the contract with? Possibly. Blood contracts were often used for marriage bonds between humans and vampires, but also for business agreements, alliances, protection oaths. Adrian began pacing again, energy returning. If Marianne made a contract with someone outside House Aldrich, someone House Morwen wanted to keep us from allying with, it would explain why they set the fire. Yes, he stopped, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Elena, if that contract still exists, if we can find it, we might finally have proof of what House Morwen did. We could bring them before the Night Court, demand justice, restore House Aldrich's position, but we don't know where to look. I just saw her hiding it in her dress before the ceiling collapsed." "No, you saw her put it in her bodice, which means she had it on her when she..." Adrian's eyes widened. "When she died or escaped." "Elena, if Marianne survived long enough to leave the house, she would have gone to ground. Somewhere safe. Somewhere House Morwen wouldn't think to look. Where? I don't know. But you might." He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his cold ones. "The blood memory is fragmentary now, but with time, with concentration, you might remember more. Where Marianne went, what she did with the contract, perhaps even who it was made with." Elena looked down at their joined hands. His touch didn't frighten her anymore. "What if I can't? What if this was all I get? Then we work with what we have." "But Elena," he squeezed her hands gently. "I know I've given you little choice in this. You've been dragged into centuries-old conflicts, marked with a bond you never asked for, trapped in my house for your own protection. But I need to know, are you willing to help me? Truly willing, not just compliant?" She studied his face, seeing past the inhuman beauty to the grief beneath. A man, no, a vampire who'd spent 3 centuries alone, his entire family murdered, powerless to get justice or even understand why. Who knelt before her now, not as a lord commanding a subject, but as someone asking for help. "I want to know the truth," Elena said slowly. "About the bond, about Marianne, about who I am and why I carry her memories." She met his black eyes steadily. "And yes, I want to help you. If House Morwen murdered your family, they should answer for it. Something shifted in Adrian's expression: surprise, relief, perhaps even hope. Thank you. But I need something in return. His eyebrows rose. Name it. Teach me about your world. Not just the dangerous parts, the politics and the wars, everything. The rules, the customs, how you live. She pulled one hand free to touch her shoulder where the mark lay. If I'm bound to House Aldrich, I should understand what that means. Adrian was quiet for a moment. Then he stood, pulling her up with him. Very well. We begin tomorrow night. I'll teach you everything: the night court, the houses, the old laws that govern us. In exchange, you help me recover the truth about the fire. Agreed. He released her hand but didn't step back. They stood close enough that Elena could see the barely visible lines at the corners of his eyes, the suggestion of freckles that had been preserved in his unchanging skin. Details that made him seem less like a monster and more like a man. You're not what I expected, Adrian said softly. What did you expect? Someone fragile, frightened, someone I'd have to protect from every shadow. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Instead, I find myself with an ally. Don't celebrate yet. I might be terrible at this. Somehow, I doubt that. He stepped back, breaking the moment. It's late. You should rest. Tomorrow night, we begin in earnest. Elena nodded, suddenly exhausted. The vision had drained her more than she'd realized. But as she turned to leave, one more question occurred to her. Adrian, why did you really kneel when you first saw my mark? He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I recognized it, not just as the Aldrich seal, but as something I'd seen once before. In a painting of Marianne, done shortly before the fire. She'd bared her shoulder to show the artist, and there he gestured to Elena's hidden mark. Was that exact pattern? I thought I was seeing a ghost. And now I think perhaps I am. Just not the kind that fades with dawn. He said it like a confession, like a prayer. Elena left him standing by the fire, a lonely figure silhouetted against the flames, and wondered which of them was truly haunted: the vampire who'd lost everything, or the mortal who carried the memories of the dead. Chapter 7. When Wolves Come Calling. The attack came 2 nights later. Just as Adrian was teaching Elena the formal protocols of the night court, they were in the drawing room. Elena practicing the complex curtsy required when greeting an elder vampire. When the windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and shadow, Adrian moved before Elena could scream, shoving her behind him as 3 figures materialized from the darkness. Not vampires this time, something else. Their eyes gleamed amber in the candlelight, and their movements carried the fluid grace of predators who ran on 4 legs as often as 2. Wolves, Adrian said, his voice deadly calm. House Morwen has called in mercenaries. The largest one, a man with silver threading his dark hair and scars crossing his bare chest, smiled with too many teeth. Lord Aldrich, House Morwen sends its regards and a formal challenge. Surrender the girl, or we take her by force. This house is under blood ward. You've already violated sacred law by entering uninvited. Wolves don't answer to vampire law. The man's bones began to shift, shoulders broadening, jaw elongating. And House Morwen pays very well. Adrian's hand shot out, fingers curling into a gesture Elena didn't recognize. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly the wolves were thrown back against the walls with bone-crushing force. One of them, a younger woman with platinum hair, yelped in pain. You may not answer to our laws, Adrian said, his voice reverberating with power that made Elena's teeth ache, but you answer to physics. And this house obeys me. The silver-haired wolf pulled himself up, blood trickling from his mouth. His eyes had gone fully amber, inhuman. Neat trick. But the wards are weakening, we all felt it. Your power isn't what it was, old one. Not without a proper blood bond to sustain it. He was right. Elena could see it in the way Adrian's hand trembled slightly, the way the shimmer in the air was already fading. Whatever magic he'd used had cost him. The wolves began to circle, separating. One drew toward the shattered windows, another toward the door, boxing them in. Elena, Adrian said quietly, not taking his eyes off the wolves. When I move, run for the study. Lock the door. There's a sigil carved into the desk. Press it and count to 30. Can you do that? I won't leave you. You will. Because if they take you, everything we've worked for dies with you. The silver-haired wolf laughed. How touching. The great Lord Aldrich, protector of mortals. How far you've fallen. Adrian's eyes went black as pitch, and when he spoke, His voice dropped into something ancient and terrible. You have no idea how far I can fall. Let me demonstrate. He moved. One moment he was standing still, the next he was across the room, his hand buried in the silver-haired wolf's chest. The wolf screamed a sound that was neither human nor animal but something caught in between. Adrian withdrew his hand, and the wolf collapsed, gasping. Silver in the heart disrupts the transformation, Adrian said conversationally, examining the silver ring on his finger, now slick with blood. Learned that to centuries ago. Shall I teach you the other lessons? The female wolf snarled and lunged. Adrian caught her by the throat mid-leap, slamming her to the ground with enough force to crack the floorboards. But the third wolf, a thin man with eyes like coal, was already moving toward Elena. She didn't think. Her hand closed around the brass candlestick on the side table, and as the wolf reached for her, she swung with all her strength. The candlestick connected with his temple. He staggered, more surprised than hurt, and his hand closed around her wrist. Pain shot up her arm as bones ground together. Elena gasped, dropping the candlestick. Then Adrian was there, wrenching the wolf away with inhuman strength. The sound of breaking bones was sickeningly loud. The wolf screamed and went limp. The study, Adrian commanded, his voice strained. Now Elena? She ran. Behind her, she heard more impacts, growls, Adrian's voice speaking in that terrible ancient tongue. She burst into the study, slammed the door, fumbled with the lock. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the key. The desk, the sigil. She shoved books aside, searching the wood grain. They're carved so finely she almost missed it. A symbol that matched the mark on her shoulder. Elena pressed her palm against it. Heat flooded through her, up her arm, across her chest, straight to the mark on her shoulder. It burned, a searing pain that made her cry out. But she kept her hand pressed to the wood, counting through gritted teeth. 1, 2, 3. The study door shuddered. Something was trying to break through. 10, 11, 12. Her shoulder blade felt like it was on fire. The mark was pulsing, hot enough that she could smell burning fabric. 20, 21. The door splintered. Amber eyes gleamed through the crack. 28, 29, 30. Light exploded from the sigil, racing up Elena's arm, across her body, out through her shoulder. The mark blazed visible through her dress, glowing like a brand. The light filled the study, poured through the doorway, and Elena heard the wolf on the other side scream. Then everything went dark. When Elena came to, she was lying on the study floor. The candles had all gone out, leaving only the dim light of false dawn filtering through the windows. Her shoulder ached, a deep, bone tiredness that spoke of something fundamental. Depleted, Adrian knelt beside her, his shirt torn and bloody, his face tight with concern. Elena, can you hear me? What happened? You activated the blood ward. Full strength. Something I haven't been able to do in decades. He helped her sit up, his hands gentle. The wolves fled. The house itself burned them when they tried to push through. Elena looked down at her hands. They looked normal, but she could still feel the echo of that terrible power. I could have killed them. Yes, but you didn't. The ward only defends. It doesn't pursue. Adrian's jaw tightened. House Morwen will know what happened. They'll know the bond between us is activating, even without completion. That makes you more valuable and more dangerous than before, so they'll send more, yes, stronger enemies, smarter tactics. He stood, pulling her up with him. Elena, we're running out of time. The night court convenes in 3 days. I need to present you formally, claim you under my protection by ancient law. It's the only way to make House Morwen back down. Present me to a room full of vampires. Elena's voice came out steadier than she felt. That sounds safe. It's not, but it's necessary. Adrian's hands remained on her arms, steadying her. The night court operates by rules older than nations. If I claim you correctly, invoke the proper oaths, they'll have to recognize your protection. Even House Morwen can't violate that without risking war with all the other houses. Elena looked around the study at the splintered door. The scattered books. The blood on the floor. That might have been wolf or vampire or both. She thought about the power that had flowed through her, the way the mark had burned. She thought about Marianne, running through flames, desperate to save a contract that might prove a murder 3 centuries old. 3 days, Elena said. Teach me what I need to know. How to stand, how to speak, how to survive in a room full of predators. Adrian's expression shifted, surprise giving way to something that might have been admiration. You're certain? No, but I'm committed. She met his eyes steadily. We made a bargain. You teach me your world. I help you find the truth. I'm not backing out because things got dangerous. For a moment, Adrian simply stared at her. Then slowly, he smiled a real smile, not the cold mask he usually wore. It transformed his face, made him look young and almost human. 3 days, he agreed. Then we walk into the lion's den together. The vampire's den, Elena corrected. That too. His smile faded, but warmth remained in his eyes. Thank you, Elena, for not running, for staying, for being braver than you have any right to be. Don't thank me yet. I might embarrass you terribly. Somehow, Adrian said softly. I doubt that. Outside, the sun was rising. Somewhere in the city, House Morwen was planning their next move. And in 3 days, Elena would stand before the night court mortal, marked and bound to a dying house. But for now, in the quiet study, with dawn breaking, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt like she mattered. Chapter 8. Lessons in Servalid. Adrian didn't sleep that day. Elena found him in the library as afternoon light filtered through heavy curtains. Surrounded by books that looked older than the printing press. You should be resting, she said from the doorway. He glanced up, and she saw the dark circles under his eyes, not shadows, but actual bruises in his too pale skin. She hadn't known vampires could look exhausted. I'm reading the protocols, Adrian said, making certain I haven't forgotten anything crucial. The night court hasn't had a formal blood bond presentation in over a century. The rituals are complex. Elena entered the library, noting how he tracked her movement with eyes that had gone from black to a deep charcoal gray. Another sign of his depleted state. His irises were becoming visible, almost human. You're hurt, more than you're admitting. The wolves had silver. It slows our healing. He closed the book with a soft thud. I'll recover before the court, but you're right, I should rest. And you should eat. You've used power you didn't know you had. Your body will be demanding fuel. As if summoned by his words, Elena's stomach growled audibly. Adrian's lips twitched. Come. I had food prepared earlier. He stood, moving more carefully than usual, and led her to a small dining room she hadn't seen before. A tray sat on the sideboard: bread, cheese, cold meat, fruit that looked impossibly fresh for winter. Elena sat and ate while Adrian watched from a chair angled toward the window, positioned so the thin sunlight wouldn't touch him directly. The silence felt companionable rather than awkward. Tell me about the night court, Elena said finally. Not the protocols, who they are, what they want. Adrian was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. There are 7 ruling houses in Britain, each controlling different territories and resources. House Aldrich once held London and the southern counties' prime feeding ground, old money, influence. When my family died, I retained the seat by right of survival, but the territories fragmented. Other houses moved in, including House Morwen, especially House Morwen. Lord Kristoff, the vampire you met in the alley, is ambitious. He's been systematically absorbing weaker houses, arranging marriages, eliminating rivals. He wants my seat on the council. Has wanted it for 3 centuries. Elena set down her fork. Why hasn't he just challenged you directly? Because vampire law requires cause for a formal challenge. As long as I maintain House Aldrich's basic obligations, attending court, paying tribute, keeping the peace in my territories, he can't move against me openly. Adrian's expression darkened. But if he can prove I'm unable to maintain a house, that I have no heirs and no prospects of creating any, the council can vote to dissolve House Aldrich and redistribute our holdings. That's why he wants me. Because the blood bond proves you could have heirs, in a manner of speaking. Blood bonds don't create biological children, but they create legal ones. If we completed the bond, anyone you bore, whether mine or another's, would carry House Aldrich's protection and inheritance rights. He paused. It's an old law, designed to allow mortal spouses to continue family lines even after their vampire partners could no longer sire children. Naturally, Elena absorbed this, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. So the court will expect nothing immediately. The bond would need to be completed first, which requires mutual consent and a formal exchange. But yes, eventually there would be expectations. Adrian's voice was carefully neutral. I won't lie to you about that. If we pursue this path, if we use the bond to protect both of us, there will be consequences beyond simple survival. She looked at him. This vampire who'd saved her, sheltered her, was now offering her a future she'd never imagined. A future that terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. What about the other houses? she asked, changing the subject. Will they support you or Kristoff? That depends on what I can offer them. House Blackwood controls the Northern Territory's old money, conservative. They value tradition above all else. Lady Blackwood might support me simply because the alternative is giving Kristoff more power. House Chen controls the eastern ports and trade routes. They're pragmatic. They'll back whoever benefits them most, and the others. Adrian listed them. House Volkov, recent immigrants from Russia with ties to the continent. House Santos, small but wealthy, controlling Bristol and the Western trade. House Ashford, scholars and record keepers who remain neutral in most conflicts. House Thorne, warriors who'd held Scotland for 8 centuries. 7 houses, 7 votes, Adrian concluded. I have my own vote, obviously. The question is whether I can secure 3 more to block any dissolution attempt. Elena pushed her plate away, no longer hungry. What do we do tonight? Tonight, I teach you to be a vampire's consort. Adrian rose and extended his hand. Starting with how to stand in a room full of predators without looking like prey. The next 3 nights were the most exhausting of Elena's life. Adrian drilled her relentlessly on posture, on the formal courtesies, on how to meet a vampire's eyes without challenging them or showing fear. He taught her the hierarchy of houses, who could be trusted, and who would smile while sliding a knife between her ribs, metaphorically speaking. He'd assured her, though his tone suggested the metaphor was thin, he taught her vampire history, the great wars and treaties that had shaped their society. He explained the blood law's consent above all, feeding only from willing sources, death to any who broke these rules. He showed her how vampires fed, describing it with clinical precision that somehow made it more intimate than if he'd demonstrated. It's not just taking blood, Adrian said on the second night. It's an exchange. The vampire takes sustenance, yes, but gives something in return: pleasure, euphoria, sometimes visions. It's why humans agree to it, why we have donors who serve willingly. Elena sat with this knowledge, trying not to think about Adrian feeding, trying not to imagine his mouth on someone's throat, the exchange of pleasure and power. Have you ever had a mortal consort before? No, I was turned young, and have spent most of my existence alone. He looked away. Rebecca used to say I was too proud, that I'd rather die alone than risk being vulnerable with someone. Was she right? Probably. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Though I prefer to think of it as being selective. On the 3rd night, with the court meeting looming, Adrian had Elena practice the formal presentation. She stood in the drawing room wearing a dress he'd commissioned, deep crimson silk that made her skin glow, cut to expose her marked shoulder. Her hair was pinned up in an elaborate style that would have taken her hours to achieve alone. But Adrian's hands had been swift and sure. When we enter, he said, circling her slowly, you'll walk 3 steps behind me. Not subservience protocol. When I present you to the council, you'll step forward and show the mark. Then you'll recite the words I taught you. Elena repeated them. By blood and bone, by ancient right, I stand witness to the bond between mortal and immortal. I am Elena Ashford, marked by House Aldrich, protected by its laws, bound by its honor. Good. Remember, meet their eyes if they speak to you directly, but don't hold the gaze. That's challenge. And if anyone asks you questions, I defer to you, as custom dictates. Elena had memorized this part. Until the bond is formally recognized, you speak for me. Exactly. Adrian stopped in front of her, studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. You look every inch a vampire's consort. Regal, dangerous, perfect. I'm terrified. Good. Fear will keep you sharp. He reached out, adjusting a curl that had escaped its pins. His fingers lingered near her throat, cold against her racing pulse. Elena, once we enter that court, there's no turning back. If you have any doubts, tell me now. She should have been afraid, should have run. But looking at Adrian, at this vampire who'd protected her, taught her, trusted her with his family's tragedy, she felt something else entirely. No doubts, she said. We do this together. Adrian's hand dropped to his side. Then tomorrow night, we change everything. Chapter 9. The night court council convened in a place that shouldn't have existed, a Gothic cathedral buried beneath the streets of London, its spires inverted, reaching down into the earth like fangs. Adrian led Elena through passages that twisted deeper than the underground, past wards that made her skin prickle and doors sealed with symbols she couldn't read. Stay close, Adrian murmured. He wore formal evening wear from another era: midnight blue velvet, silver embroidery, a cravat pinned with a sapphire that caught the torchlight. He looked like a painting come to life, beautiful and remote. And remember, show no fear. Elena's hand rested on his arm, the only point of contact allowed before the formal presentation. Her crimson dress whispered against stone floors, the fabric so fine it felt like wearing air. The mark on her shoulder blade burned warm, as if sensing what was coming. They reached a massive door carved with scenes of ancient battles, humans and vampires locked in eternal struggle. Adrian placed his palm against the wood, and it swung open silently. The council chamber took Elena's breath away. The room was circular, ringed with 7 stone thrones that had been carved directly from the bedrock. Each throne bore the sigil of its house, inlaid with precious metals and gems. Between them, galleries rose in tiers where lesser vampires sat watching. Hundreds of pale faces turned toward the chamber floor, and in the center, on a raised dais, beneath a chandelier of human bones and crystal, stood Lord Kristoff of House Morwen. He wore black and silver, his handsome face arranged in a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Lord Aldrich, Kristoff's voice carried through the chamber without him raising it. How generous of you to finally attend. We were beginning to think House Aldrich had forgotten its obligations entirely. Adrian's hand tightened briefly on Elena's before he released her. He strode forward, and Elena followed 3 steps behind as practiced, her chin high, her gaze steady. House Aldrich remembers all its obligations, Adrian said. His voice was cold iron, echoing off stone, including the obligation to bring grievances before this council. I come tonight to make formal claim and to lodge formal complaint. Murmurs rippled through the galleries. On the thrones, 6 vampires leaned forward with interest. Elena catalogued them as Adrian had taught her. Lady Blackwood, ancient and severe, her white hair piled high. Lord Chen, deceptively young-looking, his eyes calculating. Lady Volkov, beautiful as a winter storm. Lord Santos, compact and watchful. Lady Ashford, who looked more like a librarian than a vampire. And Lord Thorne, massive and scarred, his throne carved with Celtic knots. A formal claim? Lady Blackwood's voice was crisp, aristocratic. How intriguing. It's been decades since anyone invoked the old rites. Then let me refresh your memories. Adrian turned, gesturing to Elena. Come forward. Elena moved to his side, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes tracking her every step. She could feel their hunger, their curiosity, their calculation. Not one of them looked at her as a person. She was a chess piece, a commodity, a prize to be won or destroyed. This is Elena Ashford, Adrian said. Mortal, blood-marked, bound to House Aldrich by oath, older than this court. He looked directly at Kristoff. Show them. Elena turned, baring her shoulder. The mark was visible above the dress's neckline, the dark constellation of pigment that had shaped her entire life. In the chamber's light, it seemed to pulse, to move, the pattern shifting like living ink. The council chamber erupted. Vampires surged to their feet in the galleries. The council members rose from their thrones, all except Kristoff, who remained seated with an expression of carefully controlled fury. Impossible, Lady Volkov breathed. That's the Aldrich seal. The true seal, not the modern variant. I can trace it, Lady Ashford said, moving closer. May I? Elena glanced at Adrian, who nodded. The vampire approached, her fingers hovering just above Elena's skin. She spoke words in Latin, and the mark flared hot. Elena gasped, but held still. Blood memory, Lady Ashford whispered. She carries lineage. Direct lineage. She turned to Adrian, her scholarly face alight with excitement. This mark is 300 years old, passed down through generations. Lord Aldrich, where did you find her? She found me, Adrian said. Or perhaps fate found us both. Kristoff finally stood. This proves nothing. Any mortal can be marked after the fact. I could brand my sigil on a dozen humans tomorrow and claim blood bonds, not with blood memory. You couldn't. Lord Chen's voice was quiet, but carried weight. That requires an active bond at the time of marking, one strong enough to impress itself on the bloodline. Lord Aldrich, are you claiming this woman as your consort? I am claiming her protection under House Aldrich, Adrian said carefully. The bond between us is incomplete, but valid. She carries the mark of my niece, Marian Aldrich, who died in the fire of 1689. Your niece? Lady Blackwood's eyes narrowed. The one who was never found. The same. Elena carries her memories, fragmented but real. Through her, we may finally learn what truly happened the night House Aldrich burned. Every eye in the chamber turned to Kristoff. His face remained impassive, But Elena saw his hands clench on the arms of his throne. Are you accusing House Morwen of something, Lord Eldrick? Kristoff's voice was silk over steel. I am stating facts. My family died in a fire that violated every safety precaution we'd taken. House Morwen benefited greatly from our fall. And now, when this woman appears bearing proof of survived lineage, House Morwen sends wolves to kill her. Lies, Kristoff snarled. I sent no, the wolves confessed before they fled, Adrian interrupted. They named House Morwen explicitly. They spoke of payment of orders to retrieve the girl or kill her. He turned to face the council. I invoke ancient right. I claim blood debt against House Morwen for the attack on my claimed consort. I demand investigation into the fire of 1689. And I demand this council's protection for Elena Ashford until the truth is known. The chamber fell silent. Lord Thorne was the first to speak. His voice like grinding stones. Bold claims. Aldrich, do you have proof beyond the testimony of hired mercenaries? I have the mark. I have the blood memory. I have 3 centuries of unanswered questions and a house that grows stronger on the ashes of mine. Adrian's voice rang with conviction. If this council believes in justice, investigate. If you believe in law, protect her. And if you believe in truth, give me time to prove what happened. Lady Blackwood looked at her fellow council members. This matter requires deliberation. Lord Aldrich, Miss Ashford, you will wait in the antechamber while we confer. The girl stays here, Kristoff said, where we can all watch her. The girl, Elena said, surprising herself, has a name and a voice, and would prefer not to be discussed as if she were furniture. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, Lord Thorne laughed, a booming sound that echoed off stone. She's got fire, Aldrich. I'll give you that. He looked at Elena with something like approval. Very well, Miss Ashford. Speak. Tell us in your own words why we should care about a mortal marked with a dead vampire's seal. Elena met his eyes, then looked at each council member in turn. When she spoke, her voice was steady. Because I dream of fire and murder. Because I carry memories of a woman who died trying to save proof of a crime. Because someone is afraid of what I might remember, afraid enough to send killers after me. And because if this council lets fear and politics override justice, then you're no better than the monsters humans already think you are. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Lady Blackwood's lips curved into a small smile. Well, it seems House Aldrich has found itself a worthy consort after all. She looked at Kristoff, and her smile sharpened into something predatory. We will investigate. And Miss Ashford will have this council's protection until we determine the truth. She paused. All in favor? 6 hands rose. Only Kristoff's remained down. Motion carries. Lady Blackwood's voice was final. Lord Aldrich, you have until the next full moon to present your evidence. Miss Ashford, you are under council protection. To harm you is to declare war on all 7 houses. Kristoff stood, his face a mask of cold fury. This isn't over. No, Adrian agreed, moving to Elena's side. It's just beginning. As they left the chamber, Elena's knees nearly buckled. Adrian's hand steadied her, and she heard him whisper, You are magnificent. Chapter 10. What love redeems thee didn't return to Adrian's townhouse. Instead, he led Elena through the labyrinth beneath London to a place she'd never imagined existed, a garden suspended in eternal twilight, lit by luminescent moss and flowers that bloomed in colors that had no names. Where are we? Elena asked, her voice hushed in the cathedral-like space, the heart of the old city. The first place vampires and humans made peace. 1,000 years ago, Adrian guided her to a stone bench beneath a tree whose branches dripped with silver blossoms. It's neutral ground. Even Kristoff wouldn't dare violate it. Elena sank onto the bench, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the council meeting was fading, leaving her shaking. I can't believe I spoke to them like that. I could have gotten us both killed. You could have. Instead, you earned their respect. Adrian sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the cold radiating from him. Lady Blackwood values courage above all else. Lord Thorne respects strength. You gave them both. I was terrified. I know. I could hear your heartbeat from across the chamber. He looked at her, and in the strange light his eyes were almost human, dark gray shot through with black. But you stood anyway. That's what courage is, Elena. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. They sat in silence, watching the silver blossoms fall like snow. Elena's mind raced, cataloging everything that had happened. The council's verdict. The protection she'd been granted. The deadline hanging over them like a sword. 1 month, she said quietly. To prove a murder 3 centuries old. To find the contract Marianne died protecting. To recover enough memory to identify who she made it with and why House Morwen feared it. Adrian's jaw tightened. It's not much time. Then we'd better start searching. Elena turned to face him. The vision I had Marianne put the contract in her bodice before the ceiling fell. If she survived even minutes after that, where would she have gone? Not far. The fire was too intense, spread too quickly. Adrian was quiet for a moment thinking. There was a chapel on the grounds, separate from the main house. Stone construction, less vulnerable to fire. If she made it out, she might have sought shelter there. Does it still exist? The estate burned, but the foundations remain. I couldn't bear to rebuild, so I left the land empty. It's just ruins now, overgrown with 3 centuries of forest. He looked at her. But if the chapel survived, if there's any chance the contract is still there, we have to look. It won't be easy. The estate is in Surrey, 2 hours from London. And I can't travel by day, which means we'd need to search at night, in ruins. That may not be safe. Adrian's expression was troubled. Elena, I won't risk you again. Not after I proved I can handle myself. She met his eyes. Adrian, I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be locked away. I'm your ally. Remember? I remember. His hand moved, almost of its own accord, to brush a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered near her cheek, cold but gentle. I also remember what it felt like when those wolves had you. When I thought I might lose you before he stopped, jaw clenching. Before you'd even what? Adrian pulled his hand away, standing abruptly. Before I'd fulfilled my obligation to protect you. That's all. But Elena saw the lie in the way he wouldn't meet her eyes, in the tension of his shoulders. She stood as well, closing the distance between them. Adrian, look at me. He turned, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. It wasn't cold anymore, wasn't remote. It was raw and vulnerable and utterly human. Despite the inhuman eyes, I'm 350 years old, Adrian said quietly. I've walked through centuries without feeling anything but the weight of time. I've been alone so long I forgot what it meant to care if I survived the night. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face as if afraid to touch. And then you appeared, marked with my niece's seal, carrying memories of my dead family, and suddenly I remember what it means to be afraid. What it means to want something beyond mere survival. Elena's heart was pounding. What do you want? Everything I have no right to ask for. His voice was barely a whisper. Your trust. Your partnership. He stopped again, and this time she said genuine fear in his eyes. Elena took his cold hand in both of hers, warming it. My what? Your choice, Adrian said finally. If we complete the blood bond, if we formalize what the mark already implies, you'd be tied to me. To House Aldrich. To an immortal world you never asked to join. I could offer you protection, power, centuries of life, if you chose to accept the gift. But I'd also be asking you to give up the mortal world. Sunlight, aging, the normal life you might have had. The normal life where I was jilted at the altar because of a birthmark. Where I lived alone, marked as cursed, slowly starving because no one would hire me. Elena shook her head. That life was dying already, Adrian. You gave me purpose. You gave me a mystery to solve, a reason to be brave, a place where this mark makes me special instead of broken. You were never broken. His hands closed around hers. You were waiting. We both were. The silver blossoms fell around them like a blessing. In the eternal twilight, Elena saw Adrian truly not as the remote vampire lord, but as a man who'd been alone too long, who'd buried his grief in duty and solitude, who was terrified of hoping for something he might lose. I'm not saying I want immortality, Elena said carefully. I don't know what I want beyond the next month, beyond finding the truth, but I know I don't want to face it alone. And I don't think you do either. No, Adrian admitted. I don't. Then we do this together. We find the contract. We prove what House Morwen did. And after that she paused. After that, we decide what we want, both of us, freely, Adrian repeated, as if the word was foreign. No obligation, no duty, just choice. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he raised her hands to his lips and kissed them, a gesture from another century, courtly and reverent. Very well, he said. We'll search the ruins together. And whatever we find there, whatever truth we uncover, we'll face it as equals, as partners, Elena corrected. As partners, Adrian agreed. They left the garden as dawn was breaking somewhere above. Climbing back through the labyrinth toward the surface, Elena's mind was already racing ahead, planning the search, considering possibilities. But part of her remained in that moment beneath the silver tree, feeling Adrian's lips against her skin, hearing the vulnerability in his voice, blood of my blood. Bound until death breaks faith or love redeems what was lost. She understood the words now. The bond wasn't about possession or obligation. It was about choice. About two people choosing to face darkness together rather than alone. About love redeeming what centuries of solitude had lost. As they emerged into Adrian's townhouse, the first rays of sun were painting the sky pink. Adrian flinched from the windows, and Elena drew the heavy curtains closed. Rest, she told him. Tonight we go to Surrey. Tonight, we find the truth. Adrian looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled a real smile, full of warmth and hope, and something that looked remarkably like joy. Tonight, he agreed. Together, he disappeared to his day chamber, leaving Elena alone in the drawing room as full dawn broke. She touched her shoulder where the mark lay, feeling its warmth. Marianne's voice echoed in her memory. Find him. I found him, Elena whispered to the ghost. Now help me save him. The mark pulsed once, warm as a heartbeat, and in the ruins of a burned estate 2 hours away, hidden in stone and ash and time, a contract waited to be found. A contract that would change everything. But first, they had to survive long enough to reach it. The end in the shadows between mortal and immortal. Between duty and desire, Elena and Adrian found what both had lost the courage to hope. Their story continues in the ruins of House Aldrich, where truth sleeps in ashes and love offers redemption to those brave enough to reach for it.